All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending this talk, despite the fact that there's a very interesting talk in the other room as well. I'm Tobias Mueller. Hello again. This time I'm speaking in my capacity of a researcher in the University of Hamburg, a very nice city in Germany. I highly recommend going. And I want to present one of our projects, which is called privacyscore.org. You should be able to visit that website or that project right now and follow, the things live as I talk about them. And let's not lose too much time, and let's go into, the nitty-gritty details of what this is about. The main goal of this project is to make the security and privacy aspects of websites transparent to the user. So the main or the leading question is, who is or which parties is my data exposed to when I'm browsing certain websites? For example, if I'm interested in social welfare, and this is a relatively contentious topic depending on the society that you're living in. In Germany, it's something, some people might not really want other companies to, know that you're needing social welfare in order to survive. So when you're living in Hamburg and you want to get information about social welfare, what you would do is you would go to that website. So you see now this is Hamburg.de, that's the city's website, and this is the page that tells you, that gives you information about how to receive social welfare. And if you're using something like Privacy Badger, then you see so many third parties being blocked, so many tracking companies. So these are the companies that also get to know that you are getting information about social welfare. And you might not like this fact, right? You might actually have the expectation that your information gathering is private, like between you and maybe Hamburg.de, but not necessarily also sharing this information with these companies like Google Analytics or some other advertisement providers and TeliumIQ.com. I don't know what that is, but it's these companies are known to be selling your user profile and to serve you personalized ads and otherwise use your data for profiling you. And the idea of privacyscore.org is to measure these instances of tracking you and compare those with other websites of the same category. We'll go into this into the detail what that means. With the main motivation of asking oneself, is this the new normal? Do I have to expect that when I'm getting information on the web on a potentially contentious topic, is it normal that other companies learn that? Do I have to expect that, or is that particularly bad? Is this behavior of Hamburg.de particularly bad, or is that normal? And right now, we don't know. Wouldn't it be great if there was a tool that could tell you whether this behavior is normal on the web? A tool that could tell you whether Hamburg.de was behaving particularly badly compared to other, say, cities. Maybe Hamburg.de has a particularly bad website compared to all the other cities of Germany. Maybe this is even good. Maybe other cities are performing way worse. We have no good tools to do that. Or, we didn't have. Now we have privacyscore.org, because how would you make that experiment? Being an academic, I'm asking what would the experiment be? You would probably hire some students and then make them visit the websites of all these cities and then write down on a paper how many trackers the Privacy Badger blocked, and then you would compare this manually. But this is a lot of manual effort, of course. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a tool that did that automatically for you? Then you say, but there are so many existing services already, which scan websites and all. And yeah, you're right. There's many websites or many services that scan other websites, and they're doing a great job. And what these do, though, most of the time, is they focus on one website rather than a list of websites and comparing the items on the list. So there is the most popular probably is Qualys Labs with their TLS testing website. It's a very good service, highly recommended to use. What it doesn't do is, though, it doesn't tell you whether Hamburg DE is good compared to, say, Munich DE or something. So that one focuses on single websites, and there's a few other scanning services in the bottom there, like securityheaders.io, also a very good service. URLscan.io is technically very detailed and highly recommended to use if you're into, well, administrating servers and want to know how to increase the security of your website. There is something that comes close to Privacy Score. In fact, Privacy Score is a re-implementation of this service. This is Dataskydd.net, which is from the Swedish data protection authorities, and it tells you how many trackers a website has. So you can, before you visit a website, you could go to this service, this Dataskydd.net, and ask it about how many trackers a website has, so that you can then make your decision as to whether you actually want to visit that website or not. That, however, doesn't compare multiple websites, right? You would have to do that manually. You couldn't have the list of, say, German cities and then, visit the website with the least trackers. And of course, a list of German cities is maybe not as interesting. You may have other use cases. You may want to pick your, say, bank based on how good their TLS is, because, with the argument that if the bank screws up your TLS, then you don't trust them with your money, for example. Or you might want to select a health insurance company based on how many trackers they have on their website, with the argument that, well, if they don't care about your privacy on their web page, they probably don't care about the privacy of my data as well. You could think that, right? And if you, just right now, or we were looking for a tool that could build these benchmarks and tell you, well, first of all, allow you to upload your list of websites and then tell you how they compare among each other. So this is one service that's close, and there's a few other services in the bottom there. However, these do not do lists. So if you wanted to compare lists of websites, you would still need to do that manually. Mostly, or more often than not, these services also are focused more on the technical crowd, so on website operators, people who manage services or servers or configure the TLS configuration or something, rather than giving information to, say, regular users or to data protection authorities or something. And what these pages also have is a fixed ranking scheme. Privacy Score tries to, well, adapt to your needs. So if you, focus more on, say, TLS, on the TLS configuration, then you can give that more weight in the actual ranking rather than, say, the whole tracking thing, the whole privacy aspect. If you care more about the, or conversely, if you care more about the privacy stuff, then you can give that more weight than the TLS things, for example. So this is how we try to differentiate ourselves from the other projects that exist. And what we don't do is classical pen testing. So we wouldn't actively reach out and try to hack your website by maliciously injecting payloads to, I don't know, search for SQL injection or something. That's not what we are trying to do. What we are, though, also compared to these other services, is we are free software. So you can just go to github.com/privacyscore and download the software and run the instance yourself. You can see how the checks are performed and how they influence the ranking and everything. And you're very welcome to submit patches, actually. So if you don't like anything about the website or the scans or something, then by all means, clone the repository, write patches, and send a pull request. We'd love to see that. And the questions then that you could ask are something like, is Hamburg particularly good or bad because maybe the north of Germany is less rich than the south, and thus you need to have more advertisements and more trackers, to monetize the web front end sort of. Or if you're thinking about hospitals, do bigger hospitals have more trackers than smaller hospitals with fewer patients? Because maybe more patients brings in more money, and with more money they have a better staffing, better talent for managing their websites. Or because we're technical, we could ask the question: do GNU Linux distributions which use GNOME as their default desktop have better privacy aspects than distros which use KDE by default? You could ask these silly questions. And again, a privacy score allows you to answer these questions. Whereas before, you would need to investigate each site manually and then do the comparison yourself. We have these lists. So I mentioned lists are an important feature of privacyscore.org. And what is a list? Well, you could imagine in this instance, this is a list of websites, of news websites. So these are some, news websites which are popular in Germany. And these, or not necessarily Germany, but, actually, which are popular in Germany, yeah. And these are now ranked by their properties. So this could be a list. Another list could be, all the GNU Linux and BSD distributions listed on DistroWatch. And then you could compare all those distributions, and you could, if you were to choose, your next GNU Linux distribution, you could base your decision or let their security and privacy properties influence your decision as to which, GNU Linux distribution you take, with the thinking that if they care about the privacy and the security of their public-facing website, they're probably more inclined to, take your privacy seriously when you have installed the software also. Or conversely, you might want to avoid distributions which have a negative ranking here because they might not care as much about your privacy either once you've installed the software. You could, not saying that you have to do that, but some people might appreciate having the option of knowing how well a certain distribution performs. And then in my other talk, I recommended going to FOSDEM, and I took the liberty to select all the projects present at FOSDEM and put them in a list and have them compared. And if you're bored and you're looking for the next project to hack on, then you might base your decision on the fact or on the privacy and security properties of this project. And conversely, you can see which project performs the worst. And funnily enough, there's also a desktop environment list, because I haven't mentioned it now, but before, I'm a GNOME guy, right? So it's particularly funny to see, how these perform. What do we check then? So right now, we have 4 categories of checks. The first one is tracking. Like the example that I've brought involved a number of trackers, primarily the number of trackers that also get to know that I'm visiting this particular website. Then we check the whole TLS for the web front end. That involves things like the Cypher suite, pretty much what Qualys does. But we do, like, they do a good job, we do an okay job. But we take this into account still. We also care about the mail server, which is something the others don't do, because, the argument is that if they send you an email, or if you send them an email, then this is also important for, your privacy. If they screw up their TLS for the web server, for the email server, then you cannot safely send them an email. You might not like that. Again, if you don't care, you could, in the rating, you could give this less weight if you feel so inclined. And then we have a general sort of attack section where we check on various web security headers. Like there's a bunch of headers that you, better set in order to have the web browser protect better against certain attacks. And we check all those for you. So that's great. And funnily enough, for the tracking, we try to take the location into account, thinking that, if you're visiting a page of a certain country, you'd be surprised if there's also if the data is also flowing into another country. Say, if you're visiting a German website, you'd be surprised if the data flows also to the US. You might be surprised. And we try to take this into account. We check for, we have several checks for the TLS stuff. And there's very interesting results that come out of that. So we've scanned a few health insurance companies in Germany, and you'd be surprised how many have a broken TLS setup. Like so broken that you cannot actually connect to the website with TLS with a modern browser. It's surprising how many get this wrong. Because you would think it's 2018, right? And TLS is not an issue anymore because Let's Encrypt exists and everything, but still, people get this wrong. And we also check for certain what we call information leaks. This is things like leftover files on the web server. If you have your domain, I don't know, mynewswebsite.de/private.key, for example, or backup.zip, or, you figure it out. There's so many examples, and you find interesting things, because usually, or Git repositories. We are big free software, we're big fans of free software, and I love when the websites, have their source code available on the website, and when you can just Git clone the website. That's perfect. I like open source and everything. But it's usually not what the people intend, because more often than not, in these Git repositories, you find the credentials for the database. And you can imagine that this is not necessarily, what is beneficial for the user's privacy if you can just download the database credentials and then connect to the database and, get hold of the logs and user accounts and whatnot. And you'd be surprised how many private keys you'd find on, these web servers. And of course, it's not beneficial for your privacy if you can just simply download the key for the TLS certificate, right? And we believe that more often than not, these things have been left unconsciously there, because the number of valid use cases for leaving your private key around is probably small. So we tell you, when you have left your private key publicly available on the internet. How does that then look like? So we have all these scans. How do we then present it to the user? First, we have public rankings. So whatever I show is like public. We don't have anything secret. We try to be as open as possible, and you are very much welcome to take the data and do your own analysis. So we are not hiding anything behind a fence or anything. So we have this list. You can see and on the left-hand side, you can see the overview of what it, in the top part, you see this overview, so you can get a glimpse of what it looks like. And in this case, we see 15 have failed at least one critical check. This is usually TLS. Whenever something is wrong with the TLS, then, this is critical, and then you get, this red mark. And then on the right-hand side, you see the more detailed results. First, per category. Like I've mentioned, we have 4 groups of checks, and these are these groups. And then we have the detailed results once you click on one particular item that you've selected there in the list. And within this detailed view, you see, each single check you can see, and then you can open these items, and then you can get more details what failed. Here on the right-hand side, on the lower right, you get a fairly detailed description as to what has been checked and why the check was not, as good as it could have been. And the idea is that this is that the short description is good enough for casual users who want to, get an idea and compare websites just, on the surface. And the technical people can open this drawer and get more results, more technical, more detailed results as to what went wrong. So the idea. We're not necessarily good at presenting all this information because it is a lot of information. So if you have ideas as to how to make it more appealing, how make the presentation more valuable for the user, then we are all ears and we're very open to patches in this regard. So the information leaks I've mentioned, there's not only things like your backup.zip and backup.sql, we also flag you if you have your PHP info, if you're leaving that around. And that's a bit contentious because, I mean, just leaving that information around is not bad per se. I mean, you know, just reading your PHP version is not like an issue in itself. But it does reveal information that may very well benefit further exploitation. In this case, we see that it's PHP 5.5.9 and that it's running Linux 3.13. That's like ancient. When I was young, this was the up-to-date version of Linux. And the PHP version had missed at least 8 patches. And then you might say, oh, well, these patches, they would probably, you know, it would probably have been minor stuff. But, that's bad. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I had, so PHP, let me just tell you that these eight versions that these guys skipped, that were not minor patches, that were like security relevant things. And each version of PHP that was in between had CVEs assigned, and it would have been good if they patched their PHP. So in this case, leaving PHP info open to the public presents, well, or benefits further exploitation of this PHP installation. And then we're living in interesting times. Turns out that, you know, basically running wget on your web server gets you in trouble. A couple of months ago, or weeks even, there was this Canadian guy who got into trouble because he iterated over the URLs of his governmental webpage or something. I forgot the exact details. But what he essentially did was he ran for I equals 0 to 1000 or something, do wget, and then government.ca/id equals, and then the number. And that was, people misconstrued that into a hacking attempt, and so he got into trouble and all. Although all he did was, well, sending a GET request and asking the web server nicely to please return a document if there is any, and the web server happily said, yeah, here you go. And so people complained to us also, because we ask these web servers nicely for a document if there is any, and sometimes the web server gives us a document, sometimes it doesn't. And then you may ask the question, how legal do we think this is? And especially, can we do that without asking them first? Because especially in Germany, you know, everything, there's rules for everything, and you must not simply, you know, start wget on a web server and ask the web server nicely whether it has any documents. The short answer is yes. We consider this to be entirely legal because, you know, it's a publicly facing website, and we don't do much else. We don't do active break-in attempts. We don't send malicious state or anything. But let's refer to this paper there for the more detailed legal discussion of why we think this is legal. So then you may not be interested in asking the legal question, but rather whether we should do that. You know, is it ethical to do this sort of scanning and telling the world, telling the public that we have found a, say, backup.zip. And so far we've considered it to be ethical enough. The benefit of showing that in the web UI over hiding that, we consider the benefit to be better because the general public ought to know when there's an issue with the website's configuration, and if there's, you know, if the private key of your TLS session or of your TLS certificate is exposed to the general public, then, well, we consider it to be better if, you know, the world knows about it. What we don't do is, like, we don't link to that, say, private key, so we only show that it's available, but we don't allow you for clicking it. You know, you would have to do it yourself if you really wanted to go deeper. Like, we don't facilitate you actually getting hold of the data, we just show that it's an issue. All right, so how do we do that? Now you're all excited about this project, right? Now you know what it does, and now you really want to see how it works. So this is how it works. It's a bit arcane. We have a master-slave setup. So we have a relatively big master instance which runs the database, and it also runs a message queue. And we dispatch tasks over the message queue, and we have assigned a couple of dozen VMs for working on these tasks. And once the workers are done, they feed back the results via Redis. And at the end of the day, all goes back to the database, and well, where it will be read by the master again for rendering the website that you all can browse. This is going to change, though. We hope to get rid of the message queue and the Redis also. We hope to make it all purely database-based because, well, we're being academics primarily, and we don't want to be concerned so much with babysitting all these daemons and massaging the configuration so that it all works, because it turns out Redis is not trivially, it just doesn't work well out of the box. You need to configure so many things, and overcommitting memory and all that, well, bullshit we don't want to deal with. So we eventually will want to get rid of it and make it more slim, say, or easier to manage on our end. We have modules which perform the scans, and one of the more famous ones is test SSL. It's a glorious shell script, a bash script, which does all these TLS scans, and we execute these modules. They return basically a gigantic JSON string. We collect that, and then out of this JSON string, we derive the results. So we don't produce results first, we produce data first, and out of the data, we then try to display, well, the facts that we have extracted. So what have we found out so far? I showed you that I had the question, or that I produced the list of the FOSDEM projects. I would have done it with this event, but it would have been rather boring because it's not so many, right? Needs more sponsors. If you want to sponsor this event, that's good. Then you can get a free scan, and we can tell you how well you perform. So if you're interested in supporting OSDNConf, then please do and become a sponsor. That would be very great. I've done it for the project at FOSDEM, and what we see here is in the first column, well, in the very first column is the website, of course, the URL, and in the second column, by that metric, we see the number of third-party requests. That is the number of requests that do not go to eclipse.org, but rather some other domain. And in the second column, we see how many cookies this has caused, how many third-party cookies this has caused. Third-party cookies usually tend to be bad, not always, but more often than not, they're bad. In this case, we see on the third column how many of these cookies, of these third-party cookies, are well-known bad tracking cookies. Cookies set by companies that are known for profiling you and selling your profile to other companies to, sell you targeted ads and whatever they do else. And we can see that this is raw data. You can now, create some conspiracy theories as to why, this data is the way it is. And we see that, for example, OpenStack in the very bottom has the most tracking cookies, or the most third-party cookies, and in this list also the most tracking cookies. And now you might say, well, or you might come to the realization that OpenStack is maybe not as, not as community-oriented maybe as other projects, maybe. I also have a graph that, this is right. This is now sorted by third-party by third-party cookies. Like before, it was sorted by third-party requests. Now we see the third-party cookies, and again we see OpenStack being on the top. O'Reilly is they're selling books, so they probably also have an interest in making money, I guess. So they're using more third parties and more tracking cookies, more tracking companies. And then you may ask, well, what's the distribution anyway? How likely is it that I will be tracked when I'm visiting a free software project's website? And we can see that actually the labeling is wrong. So the x-axis is the number of cookies. On the horizontal, on the vertical bar, you see the number of sites, and we see that out of the 150, I think, pages, 9 were setting 0 or were making 0 third-party requests, right? So this is the number of third-party requests, and the most websites. No, you have 9 websites which do not do third-party requests at all. And this is good, right? Now you can get a feeling of how normal some things are and how one website is or behaves compared to the other websites. And yeah, so this is like a very first limited analysis of the FOSDEM stands of the Free Software Project present at Europe's biggest free software event. I would very much enjoy if you upload your own lists, if you, provide your list to the system and have it scan, the sector that is interesting you. I've mentioned we have scanned the health insurance companies, we have scanned banks, we have scanned car manufacturers, and there's so many interesting sectors that you can, or that you might want to compare in order to make an interested or an informed decision as to how much you trust a certain company or a certain project. And we have lots of things to do. We need so many patches for things. Currently, we cannot edit lists, so you can only upload things. But then, it's you're sort of stuck. If you want to make corrections to a list, then it's not so easy. We have to delete the old list and then, forward to the new one and all. It's a bit clunky. So we need some help there. It's a Python project, so if you know some Python and Django, then you're more than welcome to provide patches for that. And we have some other issues, especially regarding the presentation of all that information, because it's quite a lot of information, and we ought to make it as easily consumable as possible while also preserving the details for interested users. And this is a challenge in itself. So if you have some ideas as to how to make the presentation usable, then we'd be all ears for hearing your ideas. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to question.
We have some questions. I've seen him at the very beginning, so.
Thank you. Okay, my question is, if the website or URL that you are scanning contains elements of honeypots, this will break your rating, right?
Right.
How your project is going to deal with this?
Right. So the question is whether we also scan honeypots and how we deal with it. It's very correct. Actually, it got us in trouble also, because there are websites which were known to be bad, or like domain names which were known to be bad, and you get onto sort of a more special list if you try to connect to that domain. If you ever send a TCP packet or an IP packet to a certain address, then you land on a sort of a blacklist, and turns out that the university's IT department is not amused when it sees such weird behavior. And to make the long story short, we don't deal with it so well. Once we know about these sort of honeypots or black holes, then we have two mechanisms. The first is we have a blacklist, like in the application layer, we have a blacklist, so the application, the privacy score itself, knows about which domains not to scan. And then the second defense mechanism is firewall rules. So we have IP tables rules for certain hosts. Because I mentioned people complain, and we don't force them. We don't force our scans onto them. If somebody does not want to receive packets from us, I mean, they could drop our packets themselves if they wanted to, but we also happily drop our packets sent to them because it saves our infrastructure, our bandwidth and all. So yeah, long story short, we have blacklists and IP tables, and once we get to know that we have like a bad website or a honeypot or something, we block it, but we have no, say, proactive way of dealing with that, and that's bad. Like we should probably get a feed. Like we should probably connect with the certs and the people who does this network scanning, and then use these feeds into our system and like not scan them, by default. The same problem could be. It's not become a problem yet, but I mean, you could. I must not say that too loudly, but you could probably run your Bitcoin miner, right, with privacyscore.org. Like you submit so many websites with your Bitcoin miner, and I actually don't know what the timeout is. It's probably, I don't even know whether we have one. So if things go bad, you could consume all our CPU in mining your Bitcoins and all. But please don't do it. Like it would be very nice. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I have a question as well. So my question is less technical but more general. So as far as I know, currently the data privacy and user privacy overall is kind of an issue, and everyone looking for a way to dissolve this problem. So do you see your project as one way to show common day user how his data is handled, and to provide him more visible insight on how he can actually react to what one site or another do with his information? So do you see it as a kind of tool that will help non-technical users to understand do this site or another complaints with the way they should handle their data?
Right. Yeah, that was one of the goals, actually, to make the privacy aspects transparent, so that it's so that you can actually see how a website behaves. Because right now, or without privacyscore.org, you have no way of actually telling how a website behaves, other than maybe linking to urlscan.io or something. But then, so yeah, one goal is to make that behavior transparent, and with these lists, to allow the user to make an informed decision as to whether to choose, website A or website B. And I mentioned these health insurance companies. Turns out they were not very amused when they saw the ranking, and they were actually one of the biggest to complain. And although some of those, they weren't on the bottom, they just disliked being below some other companies, I suppose. So yeah, that's the aim, to sort of foster competition among the website operators to be better than the others. The hope is that if you are the company and you see your website in that list of, say, health insurance companies or universities or cities or whatever, and then that you think, oh, why am I not better than I don't know, this other company? I want to be better. Why can we not do better than this? And let's invest some money to make the world a better place, or make our website, simply make our website better to be higher in the ranking. So that's one goal, like to inform the user, and then to foster the competition among the websites. And thirdly, you mentioned that data protection is now a relatively big thing, also in Europe at least. We actually got specific requests from data protection agencies, from authorities who regulate markets, for this sort of tool, because turns out that if everybody does, say, TLS 1.2 or maybe 1.3, maybe TLS 1.2 is a good example. If everybody does that, then if you're not doing it, you're sort of special, and you should probably be punished harder than someone who did use TLS 1.2 properly. However, TLS 1.3 is probably not used as much by the rest of your sector. If you're thinking now health insurance companies, if only one health insurance company is using TLS 1.3, then the data protection agency might punish someone less hard if they are not also using TLS 1.3, because it's not considered to be the standard yet. So in order to find out what do people actually do and what is the standard, they want to know how a sector performs in a certain aspect. Thank you very much for that excellent question. It was very good.
Thank you once again for your brilliant talk.
Thank you.
And now we have short announcement and later one more talk, the last one for today.